The sound of screeching tires echoed through the busy avenue. Ryan Parker, the millionaire heir and CEO of one of the largest tech companies, was behind the wheel of his sports car, its engine roaring loudly. He wasn't the type of man to run from responsibility, but that afternoon had been particularly difficult. His grandmother, the matriarch of the Parker family, had once again insisted on the subject of marriage. "Ryan, I won't be around forever," she had said just hours earlier, her eyes glistening with tears. "I want to see you happy before I go. You need someone to care for you, someone who truly loves you." He scoffed in frustration as he maneuvered the car into the underground parking lot of Parker Tech headquarters. Marriage, love, those things are just distractions, he thought. But her words echoed in his mind, leaving an unsettling feeling he couldn't shake. As he arrived at the building, something unexpected caught his attention. A group of employees had gathered near the entrance, their worried murmurs filling the air. At the center was a petite woman with loose brown hair, kneeling beside a young man who had collapsed. "Call an ambulance!" she shouted, her voice trembling. Without thinking, Ryan specced out of the car. It was Louisa, an employee he had barely noticed before, but something about her demeanor intrigued him. Unlike the women who usually surrounded him, she seemed entirely indifferent to his presence. "What's going on here?" Ryan's firm voice cut through the commotion. Louisa looked up at him, clearly recognizing him as the CEO. "It's my brother, Lucas. He has a heart condition and just fainted. I can't get him to the hospital on my own," she said, her hands trembling. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before pulling out his phone and signaling for his security team to assist. "Get him into my car. I'll drive." Louisa's eyes widened in surprise. "But, Mr. Parker, you don't have to do this." "And let you waste time arguing while he needs help? No way. Let's go." His voice was serious, leaving no room for refusal. The drive to the hospital was tense. Lucas lay unconscious in the back seat, while Louisa held his hand, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Ryan glanced at her through the rearview mirror, trying to make sense of the emotions stirring within him. He was known for being cold, but something about this woman's vulnerability unsettled him. "He's going to be okay, right?" Louisa asked, breaking the silence. Ryan took a deep breath before responding. "The best doctors will be waiting for him. Trust me." When they arrived at the hospital, Ryan used all his influence to ensure Lucas was attended to immediately. While they waited, Louisa looked at him, her hands clasped in prayer. Ryan stood beside her, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Something about her determination stirred something within him. After long minutes, the doctor appeared. "Your brother's condition is stable, but he'll need more advanced treatment to avoid future complications," the doctor explained. "I recommend seeking a specialist as soon as possible." "Thank you, doctor," Louisa replied, her relief mixed with evident concern. Ryan noticed the conflict in her eyes, the relief that Lucas was out of immediate danger, and the fear of not being able to afford the treatment he needed. When they left the hospital, Ryan walked her to the parking lot. The night air was cold, and Louisa wrapped her arms around herself for warmth. "How's your brother?" Ryan asked, his voice softer than usual. "He's okay for now, but—" She hesitated, staring at the ground. "The treatment he needs is very expensive. I'll need to work even harder to come up with the money." Ryan narrowed his eyes. He knew Louisa was already working tirelessly at Parker Tech, often staying late into the night. That didn't seem like a viable solution. "And do you think
can handle that on your own?" His question was direct, almost cold, but his intention was practical. Louisa lifted her gaze to him, surprised by the question. "I don't have another choice, Mr. Parker. He's my brother. He's all I have left." Ryan remained silent for a moment, thoughts racing in his mind. He remembered his grandmother's words. "You need a wife, someone who truly loves you." An idea began to take shape in his head. It was risky, but it might solve two problems at once. "What if I offered you a solution?" he finally said. "A solution?" Louisa said, suspicious. Ryan took a step closer, crossing his arms. I'll pay for your brother's entire treatment, every penny, but in return, you'll have to do something for me." Louisa frowned, visibly uncomfortable with the suggestion. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Parker?" "A fake marriage," he answered bluntly. "My grandmother is pressuring me to get married, and I want her to stop. If you agreed to be my wife for 3 months, I'll cover all your brother's medical expenses." Louisa's eyes widened in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm serious. It will benefit both of us. You'll save your brother, and I'll get my grandmother off my back. It's just a contract, nothing more." She crossed her arms, feeling a mix of shock and indignation. "Marriage isn't something you negotiate like a contract, Mr. Parker." "Not for me," he replied, indifferent. "But for you, this might be your only chance to save your brother." Louisa swallowed hard. The offer seemed absurd, almost insulting. But he was right about one thing. Lucas needed help, and she didn't have the resources for it. I need to think about it," she said, turning to leave. Ryan nodded, his eyes fixed on her as she walked away. He knew her decision wouldn't be easy, but he was certain she'd come back. After all, he always got what he wanted. Louisa spent the entire night wide awake, lying on her bed. She stared at the ceiling of the small room she shared with Lucas while her thoughts raced. Ryan's proposal seemed absurd, but it undeniably offered a solution to a problem she couldn't solve on her own. The sound of Lucas coughing brought her back to reality. She got up and went to her brother's bedside. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently stroking his forehead. "Just a little cough. Don't worry," Lucas replied weakly. She smiled, trying to hide her concern. Lucas was everything she had in the world. Their parents had died in a car accident when they were still children, and since then, she'd taken on the role of both mother and older sister. But now, Lucas's health was deteriorating rapidly, and Louisa knew she had to make a decision. The next morning at Parker Tech, Ryan was more distracted than usual. Her coworkers noticed. "Are you okay, Louisa?" asked Camila, one of her closer colleagues. "Yeah, I just have a lot on my mind," she replied, not going into details. The truth was that every minute seemed to pile on more pressure. At lunchtime, while Louisa sipped her coffee in the company's break room, Ryan appeared suddenly. "We need to talk," he said firmly. "Mr. Parker, I'm busy," she began, but he cut her off. "It won't take long." He gestured for her to follow him into an empty meeting room. Once inside, Ryan closed the door and crossed his arms. "So, have you thought about my proposal?" Louisa took a deep breath. "Yes, I have, and I don't think it's a good idea." "You don't think so?" Ryan arched an eyebrow. "Because I see it as the perfect solution for both of us. Because marriage, even a fake one, isn't something I want to take lightly." She looked him straight in the eye, her tone determined. Ryan sighed in frustration. "Louisa, let's be practical. Your brother needs help, and I can provide it. You don't have to like me, and I don't have to like you. It's just a contract." "And what happens when your grandmother finds out the truth?" Louisa shot back. He shrugged. "She won't. And when the 3 months are up, we go our separate ways." Louisa remained silent, analyzing every word. It wasn't just the fear of entering something so personal with a man like Ryan. It was also her pride. But thinking about Lucas, his health, and the time he might not have, weighed heavier. Eyes for a moment is trying to control the emotions overwhelming her. When she opened them again, she seemed resolute. "All right, I accept." Ryan couldn't hide the small smile of triumph that crossed his face. "Good. We start tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Louisa's eyes widened. "Yes, my grandmother is visiting, and she needs to believe our marriage is real from the start." Louisa sighed, already feeling the weight of her decision. "Fine. But know that I won't make this easy for you." Ryan chuckled lightly, his usual arrogance lacing his tone. "I don't expect you to.
but I guarantee it will be interesting." The next morning started early for Louisa. Upon waking up, the first thing she felt was a mix of anxiety and regret. Her mind kept questioning the decision she had made the night before, but a quick glance at Lucas, peacefully asleep despite his condition, reminded her she was doing what was necessary. Before leaving for work, she tied her hair into a neat bun and put on the best outfit she had, a simple yet elegant dress. As she walked toward the company, each step felt heavier, as if she were venturing into unknown territory. When she arrived at the reception desk of Parker Tech, she was surprised to find Ryan waiting for her, with his usual serious expression. Impeccably dressed, he looked as if merely existing was a grand event. "Punctual, that's good," he remarked, checking his watch. "And you're as direct as ever," Louisa replied, raising an eyebrow. Ryan ignored the sarcasm and gestured for her to follow him. "Come with me. We need to align the details." The two entered the elevator, the silence broken only by the sound of the doors closing. When they reached Ryan's private office, he sat behind his massive wooden desk and opened a folder filled with documents. "First and foremost, this is the contract," he said, sliding the document toward Louisa. She hesitated, but picked up the paper, reading every line carefully. "You really thought of everything," she commented, surprised to see even the smallest details accounted for. "I always think of everything. I need to ensure there won't be any issues." "And what if your grandmother wants to live with us to closely monitor the marriage?" Louisa teased, half laughing. Ryan paused for a moment, as if considering the possibility. "In that case, we'll improvise." She chuckled softly, surprised by that glimpse of humor, but soon returned to seriousness. "All right, where do I sign?" "Here." Ryan handed her a pen. Louisa hesitated for a moment, the pen hovering over the line. This was a point of no return. But remembering Lucas, she took a deep breath and signed the contract. "There. Now we're officially married on paper," she said, handing back the pen. Ryan gave a faint smile, satisfied. "Good. First rule, our relationship in public must look completely real, no exceptions." "And how exactly do you expect me to pretend to be in love with you?" she asked, crossing her arms. He stood up, walking around the desk, until he was just a few steps away from her. "I trust your talent. After all, it wouldn't be the first time you surprised me." Louisa rolled her eyes, but before she could respond, Ryan pulled an envelope from the folder. "Here's the advance for your brother's treatment. The hospital has already been notified, and he can start today." She took the envelope, feeling a lump in her throat. "Thank you. Truly. As much as I don't like this, I don't have the words to express my gratitude." "No need to thank me. We're just fulfilling a deal," he replied coldly. The rest of the day was a mix of training for the wife role and rehearsals for the first meeting with Ryan's grandmother, scheduled for the next day. Louisa was surprised by how meticulous Ryan was. He even corrected the way she held his hand. "If you're going to fake it, do it right," he said impatiently. Despite their exchanged barbs, they both knew they had a common goal and needed to collaborate. That night, when Louisa returned home, she felt both physically and emotionally drained, but seeing Lucas smiling after hearing he would start treatment the next day made everything feel a little more bearable. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but for now, she chose to focus on what truly mattered: her brother's health. The next day, Ryan's grandmother's mansion was decorated for a formal dinner. The chandelier lights sparkled like stars on
The vaulted ceiling and the aroma of sophisticated dishes filled the air. It was the perfect setting for the meeting that would mark the beginning of Ryan and Louisa's plan. Louisa arrived accompanied by Ryan, both impeccably dressed for the occasion. She wore a blue dress he had sent her that morning, a gesture she had reluctantly accepted, but couldn't avoid. The dress was elegant, modest, but fit her perfectly. Ryan seemed to notice his brief glance lingering before he turned away.
"Remember, be natural but convincing," he whispered as they walked toward the entrance of the house. "Easy for you to say. You're naturally arrogant," she replied with a sarcastic smile. He merely let out a short laugh. As they entered, they were greeted by a gray-haired woman with a warm smile. Mrs. Margaret, Ryan's grandmother. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she saw her grandson bringing a girlfriend to meet her. "Ryan, finally! And this must be Louisa," Margaret said, approaching to greet her with a warm hug. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Parker," Louisa responded, trying to hide her nervousness. "No, Mrs. Call me Margaret," she insisted, holding Louisa's hands. "Come in, sit down. We have so much to talk about." The dinner began with Margaret asking questions about how the couple met. Louisa followed the rehearsed story. "We met at the company. He was my boss, but, well, somehow we started getting closer." Margaret gave Ryan a suspicious look as he focused on cutting the steak on his plate. "He's never mentioned anyone before. I thought he was married to his work," she remarked with a playful yet curious tone. "I thought so too," Louisa said with a soft smile. Ryan glanced at Louisa, surprised by how naturally she had responded. It was a lie, of course, but it sounded sincere enough to fool even him. "Louisa has a way of making me see things differently," Ryan said, almost as if he was testing her acting skills. "It seems she does," Margaret replied, smiling with approval. As the dinner progressed, Louisa began to relax. Despite everything, Ryan's grandmother was a warm and easy-to-please person, and for some reason, that made her feel more confident. However, the moment of ease was interrupted when Margaret asked, "So, when can I expect great-grandchildren?" Louisa choked on the water she was drinking, while Ryan was momentarily speechless. Well, we haven't thought about that yet," Ryan said, trying to sound casual, but "Don't take too long. I'd love to see them while I'm still here," Margaret joked, laughing. After dinner, Ryan and Louisa said their goodbyes, and Margaret seemed visibly pleased. "I like her, Ryan. Don't let her get away," his grandmother said, with a tone that sounded more like a warning. On their way home, silence filled the car. Finally, Louisa broke the ice. "You didn't warn me about questions about children." "I didn't think she'd ask that so soon," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Well, now we know she's taking this more seriously than we thought," Louisa said. Ryan simply nodded, aware that his grandmother was more invested in the plan than he anticipated.
"Like Lucas's medical bills, which seemed to pile up endlessly. I need to get back to work. There's still a lot to do," Louisa said, ending the conversation. Ryan simply nodded, watching her leave. Something within him was changing, and he didn't know how to handle it. Later, while having coffee with some colleagues, Louisa let her guard down and began venting. "Lucas is still in the hospital. The expenses are spiraling out of control, and I don't know what else to do," she said, trying to hold back her emotions. "Have you thought about asking for help?" one of the colleagues asked. "No, I don't want to depend on anyone," Louisa replied firmly. What Louisa didn't know was that Ryan was walking down the hallway at that very moment. He stopped when he heard the name Lucas and listened, intrigued. When she mentioned her financial struggles, something stirred within him. He knew how hard it was to ask for help, and he admired her determination. But at the same time, he felt an inexplicable urge to intervene. At the end of the day, Ryan called Louisa to his office. "You asked to see me," Louisa said, entering. Ryan hesitated for a moment before responding. "I overheard you talking about your brother. Is he okay?" Louisa was surprised but answered cautiously. "He's stable, but the situation is complicated." Ryan leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "What if I could help?" She widened her eyes, clearly confused. "Help? How?" "I'll pay for his treatment. All the expenses, no exceptions," Ryan said, his voice firm. Louisa took a step back, incredulous. "Why would you do that?" He stared at her for a moment before continuing. "Because I have a proposal, a deal. You marry me for 3 months, and I'll pay for everything, no exceptions."
Louisa felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. "Marry Ryan Parker? You can't be serious," she said, trying to laugh off the absurd idea. "I'm very serious," he replied, his tone unwavering. "This is insane," Louisa murmured, shaking her head. "Maybe, but think about it. It could solve your problem and mine." He stood up and walked over to her, handing her a card with his personal number. "If you decide to accept, let me know." Louisa left the office with her head spinning. What Ryan was proposing sounded crazy, but at the same time, the possibility of saving Lucas was too tempting to ignore. Louisa spent the night pacing in her small apartment. Ryan's proposal replayed in her mind like a broken record. The offer was outrageous, but the promise of saving Lucas was undeniable. She couldn't sleep, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her. She glanced at Lucas, asleep on the couch. He looked pale, his breathing shallow. The thought of losing him made her chest tighten. "What should I do?" she whispered, as if the empty room could answer. Morning came, and with it, Louisa's resolve. She picked up Ryan's card and stared at the number. Taking a deep breath, she dialed. Ryan was at his desk signing documents when his phone buzzed. Seeing an unknown number, he immediately knew who it was. "Louisa," he said, answering. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "I'll do it." A smile tugged at Ryan's lips, though he kept his tone neutral. "Good. Let's discuss details. Can you come to my office today?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Louisa entered Ryan's office, her heart pounding. He gestured for her to sit, his usual confident demeanor intact. "I'm glad you've decided," Ryan began. "I'm doing this for Lucas," Louisa clarified, her tone firm. Ryan nodded. "Understood. This is strictly business. 3 months of marriage, and I'll ensure your brother gets the best medical care available." He slid a contract across the desk. "This outlines the terms. We'll live together to make it convincing. Public appearances will be necessary. After 3 months, we'll divorce, and you'll walk away with everything settled." Louisa skimmed the document, her nerves on edge. "Why me?" she asked, suddenly looking up. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Because you're the last person anyone would expect. You're not after my money or status, and that makes you perfect for this." She frowned, but didn't argue. "And your grandmother?" Ryan smirked. "She'll be thrilled. She doesn't need to know it's an arrangement." Louisa hesitated, but finally signed the contract. "When does this start?" Ryan stood, extending his hand. "Now." She shook his hand, sealing the deal. The weight of her decision settled on her shoulders, but for Lucas,
would endure anything. That evening, Ryan picked Louisa up from her apartment. It was the first step in solidifying their plan. "I'll have your things moved to my house tomorrow," he said, as she climbed into his sleek black car. "Your house?" Louisa echoed. "We need to make this believable. Married couples live together." The ride was silent after that. Louisa stared out the window, feeling like a stranger in her own life. When they arrived at Ryan's mansion, she was stunned. The grand estate seemed like something out of a fairy tale, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Welcome home," Ryan said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Louisa's jaw tightened. "It's temporary," she replied, walking past him. Ryan watched her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. She wasn't like anyone he'd met before, and he found himself intrigued. The following days passed in a blur for Louisa. She found herself trying to adjust to life in Ryan's mansion, a place that felt too vast and cold for her taste. Despite the lavish surroundings, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the luxury, moving effortlessly through his daily routine. They barely exchanged words, aside from the necessary ones, to maintain the illusion of a happy, normal couple. Louisa stayed busy with work, her thoughts always drifting back to Lucas. Every moment she spent in this grand house was a step closer to saving him, but the weight of the lie was heavy on her shoulders. She couldn't help but feel guilty for pretending to be Ryan's wife, even if it was for a good cause. One evening, Ryan decided it was time to introduce Louisa to some of his closest friends.
"We're hosting a small dinner tonight," Ryan said, as he approached her in the kitchen. "Get ready. It's important that we make it look convincing." Louisa nodded, though the idea of being around Ryan's social circle made her nervous. She had never been part of a world so glamorous, so detached from her reality. When the guests arrived, Louisa was greeted with polite smiles, but it was clear that they were all curious about her. They whispered behind their glasses of wine, trying to get a read on the woman who had suddenly entered Ryan's life. Ryan seemed to enjoy the attention, his usual arrogance in full display. He played the role of the perfect husband effortlessly, guiding the conversation and making everyone laugh. But every so often, Louisa caught him glancing at her, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. As the night went on, Louisa grew more and more uncomfortable. She felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by people who had everything and yet seemed to lack something. Genuine connection, perhaps. She excused herself to the balcony, desperate for some air. As she stepped outside, she leaned against the railing, taking a deep breath. "I don't belong here," she murmured to herself. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. "You're not alone, are you?" Ryan's voice cut through the quiet night. Louisa turned to see him standing there, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, but Ryan stepped closer. "It's not easy, is it?" he said, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "The whole pretending to be happy in front of everyone?" Louisa looked at him, surprised by his words. "No," she admitted. "It's not easy at all." For a moment there was silence between them, both of them standing in the stillness of the night. Louisa realized that despite their differences, there was something about Ryan that was vulnerable. "Let's go back inside," Ryan finally said, his voice softening. "We'll get through this together." In the days that followed, something began to shift between Ryan and Louisa. They spent more time together, not just in the formal setting of the mansion, but in moments that felt less like a business arrangement and more like a real partnership. Ryan still maintained his aloof demeanor, but Louisa noticed the subtle changes, how he would pause before responding to her, how his gaze lingered a little longer than necessary. She didn't know if it was her imagination or if there was something more beneath the surface. One afternoon, while they were both in the living room, Ryan broke the silence. "Louisa, I'd need to ask you something," he said, his tone serious. She looked up, startled by the shift in his voice. "What is it?" "Do you ever think about what happens after the 3 months, after we divorce?" Her heart skipped a beat. "I don't know," she said. "Honestly, I'm focused on Lucas. I'm not thinking about what comes next." Ryan nodded, though his expression seemed conflicted. "Right," he said, almost as if to himself. The days went by, each one blurring into the next, as Louisa and Ryan continued their delicate dance of a pretend marriage. Despite the growing tension between them, they both remained focused on their respective goals. Louisa on saving her brother, and Ryan on appeasing his grandmother's wish. However, the air between them had shifted. It was a quiet evening when Ryan invited Louisa to dinner. It wasn't an official event, just the two of them in the grand dining room, but it was one of the rare moments when they shared time alone. As they sat at the table, the quiet clinking of silverware was the only sound. Ryan was unusually quiet tonight, his usual sharp wit absent. Louisa couldn't help but notice the difference. "What's wrong?" she finally asked, setting her fork down. Ryan looked up, surprised, as though he hadn't expected her to speak. "Nothing," he replied quickly, but Louisa could tell it wasn't the truth. "You're not the same," she observed softly. Ryan leaned back in his chair, looking at her with an unreadable expression. "I'm not," he admitted. "You're right." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "But I don't think I know what to do about it." Louisa felt her heart race at his words. There was something vulnerable in his tone, something she hadn't expected from the man who always seemed to have everything under control. She swallowed hard, unsure of what to say next. "You don't have to do anything," she said quietly. "We're in this together.
It's just 3 months. After that, things will go back to normal. Ryan's eyes flickered with a hint of something. Doubt, maybe? He didn't respond immediately, instead studying her with a curious intensity. Later that night, as they walked through the mansion's garden after dinner, the tension was palpable. The moonlight cast soft shadows over the manicured lawns, and the quiet serenity of the night seemed to reflect the distance between them. "Ryan," Louisa began, breaking the silence, "what will happen after the 3 months are over? I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I'm not sure if I can just walk away." Ryan turned to face her, his expression serious. "I told you before, this was always about my grandmother's wish. After the 3 months, you're free to go. No strings attached." Louisa nodded, though a deep sense of uncertainty gnawed at her. She hadn't expected this arrangement to feel so real. She hadn't expected her feelings to become so tangled. "I'm not a part of your world, Ryan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can't just pretend I know we're not a real couple, but I can't help how I feel. I can't keep living in this lie." Ryan stepped closer, his usual confident demeanor now replaced with something more raw. "Neither can I," he said quietly. "But what if we let it be real, just for a moment?" The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with meaning. Louisa's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this side of Ryan, so open, so unsure. For the first time, Louisa saw Ryan as more than just a wealthy, arrogant businessman. She saw the man behind the facade, the one who, despite everything, was just as vulnerable as she was. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the world around them falling away. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to respond. Everything was happening too fast, and yet in that moment, she felt something shift, something that felt too real to ignore. Ryan reached out gently, taking her hand in his. "I know we made this arrangement out of necessity," he said, his voice barely above whisper, "but I can't pretend it doesn't mean something to me. You mean something to me." Louisa's heart raced as she looked into his eyes, searching for any sign that this wasn't just another game. But there was nothing but sincerity there, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more. The following days were a whirlwind of unsaid emotions. Ryan and Louisa continued with their agreement, but the atmosphere between them had changed. The line between the fake marriage and what was starting to feel real
became thin. Neither of them knew exactly how to handle it, but at the same time, the connection between them grew. With every gesture, every fleeting glance, it was an electric tension that surrounded them at all times. Louisa was exhausted. Her brother Lucas was still in critical condition, and the pressure on her was mounting. At work, she was pushing herself harder than ever to maintain her composure, but she knew her mind was elsewhere. In her personal life, Ryan's presence made everything more complicated. The man she was married to for pure convenience had become the center of her thoughts. One of those days while working in her office, Louisa received a call. It was from the hospital. She sighed deeply, already knowing that the news wouldn't be good. "Miss Louisa, your brother will need urgent surgery. The cost will be very high, and unfortunately the treatment is beyond your financial means." Louisa felt a knot in her throat, frustration and desperation growing inside her. She looked out the office window, not really seeing anything. The weight of responsibility on her shoulders was becoming unbearable. It was at that moment that Ryan entered the office, interrupting her thoughts. "I know what you're thinking," he said, walking towards her. His voice was firm, but with a softness she had never noticed before. "I can help. I'll pay for Lucas's surgery." Louisa stared at him in surprised. "How did he know? Did you overhear the conversation?" she asked, still trying to process. Ryan nodded slowly, but instead of looking ashamed or invasive, he seemed concerned. Something in his gaze had changed. It was no longer the cold but calculating look she had known. It was as if he was truly seeing her, as though something inside him had finally noticed her in a deeper way. "I know this seems strange," Ryan continued, "but if you accept my help, I want something in return. Not a contract, but something more. I want you to be mine. For real." Louisa felt her heart race. What was he saying? It was as if he were proposing more than a marriage of convenience. He was offering something real. "Ryan, you don't understand. I can't accept your help like this, just out of the blue. There's so much more at stake here." "I know," he interrupted, "but I can't let you drown in this cycle of worry and pain. Let me help you, not as a businessman, not as your boss, but as someone who truly cares." Ryan's last words hit her hard. It was a sincere feeling, something she never expected to hear from him. And instead of pushing him away, Louisa felt a warmth growing inside her. She took a deep breath, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "I don't know what to do with this," she murmured, "but for now, I need to focus on what's best for Lucas." Ryan nodded, giving her space, but his eyes never left hers. Louisa felt an internal battle growing inside her. She wanted to accept his help. She wanted to surrender to this moment, but she knew she couldn't do that without first dealing with her brother's situation. However, something inside her was calling her toward more. She'd already realized that she couldn't keep denying what she was feeling. She needed to make a decision, and soon. The next morning, Ryan called Louisa into an urgent meeting. She entered the conference room where he was waiting, his expression serious. When she sat across from him, he placed a pile of papers on the table. "I've already made arrangements for Lucas's treatment," he said directly. "No beating around the bush. And for once, I want you to know, this is not just a transaction. It's not about the marriage. It's about what the two of us are starting to feel. And that's real, Louisa." She looked at him, her eyes void of words. Louisa was still confused about everything that was happening, but she couldn't deny what Ryan's gaze expressed. There was sincerity in his words, something she wasn't ready to ignore. "And what do you expect from me, Ryan?" She asked, her voice softer, almost hesitant. He leaned forward, his eyes steady and unwavering. "I expect you," he said, "and that's something I can't hide anymore." Louisa felt her heart race. What was he saying? He was as if he were proposing more than a marriage of convenience. He was offering something real. "Ryan, you don't understand. I can't accept your help like this, just out of the blue. There's so much more at stake here. I know. But I can't let you drown in this cycle of worry and pain. Let me help you, not as a businessman, not as your boss, but as someone who truly cares." Louisa felt the pressure in her chest grow, her heart beating faster. She knew that the decision was in her hands now. She knew that by stepping toward Ryan, there would be no going back, but at the same time, she felt that this was what she wanted, the thing she needed. Louisa's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Ryan's words lingered in her thoughts, replaying over and over in her head. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt toward him, but the practicality of their arrangement, their fake marriage, made her hesitant. Could she truly let herself fall for him? And even if she did, what did that mean for her? What would it mean for Lucas? After the meeting, she spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze. The clock ticked on, but time felt like it was suspended. Every corner of the office seemed to reflect the chaos inside her.
She couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan, his sharp, intelligent eyes, his sudden display of vulnerability, and the way he had looked at her when he made the proposal. It was as if the walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling. As the workday drew to a close, Louisa walked to the elevator in a daze, ready to go home. But she didn't want to face the empty apartment. She didn't want to be alone with her thoughts anymore. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ryan. "I'm leaving the office now. Would you like to grab a coffee? We need to talk." A strange flutter stirred in her chest. Coffee? Was this another work-related conversation, or was it something more? She hesitated for a moment before typing back, "Sure. Where should we meet?" The coffee shop was quiet, a cozy corner of the city where the hum of life outside seemed to fade into the background. Louisa arrived first, nervously shifting in her seat, her thoughts scattered. She tried to calm herself, taking deep breaths and reminding herself that this was just another conversation, just a business arrangement, nothing more. But when Ryan walked in, something inside her shifted. There was an intensity to his presence that filled the room. He was dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. He walked over to her, offering a small, tentative smile. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice softer than usual. Louisa nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence between them was almost suffocating, but she couldn't help but notice how close he was now. The table between them felt like an ocean, but she could still feel the heat of his presence. "So what did you want to talk about?" she asked, trying to sound casual. But her nerves betrayed her. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his coffee, taking a long sip, then setting the cup down with deliberate care. He seemed lost in thought, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface of the table. "I've been thinking about what I said," he began slowly, "about our arrangement. And I know it's complicated. It was never supposed to be anything more than a temporary solution." Louisa's heart skipped a beat. She could feel where this conversation was heading, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "But," she prompted. Ryan met her gaze. His eyes were no longer the cold, calculating eyes of the CEO she had come to know. They were softer, vulnerable. "But I can't ignore what's happening between us," he admitted. "I've been fighting it, but I can't help how I feel. This wasn't supposed to happen, but I've grown to care about you, Louisa." His words hit her like a shockwave. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, throwing her off balance. She felt her breath catch in her throat. "Ryan, this isn't just a business arrangement for you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan shook his head, his expression serious. "No, it started out that way, but now I want more. I know this isn't simple, but I can't pretend anymore." For a moment, Louisa didn't know what to say. Her mind was racing, processing everything he had just said. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to say something, anything, that would give her clarity. But the truth was, she was scared. Scared of how much she was beginning to care about him. Scared of how much she might lose if this all fell apart. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice cracking slightly. Ryan leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't have to know right now," he said softly. "I just want you to know that I'm here. Whatever you decide, I'm here." For the first time, Louisa felt as though she could breathe. The tension in her chest eased just slightly, as she realized that for once, someone was offering her something without expecting anything in return, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that her heart was already too involved, that Ryan had already become more than just a business partner in her life. The days that followed their coffee meeting felt like a blur to Louisa. Every time she saw Ryan at work, her heart would race. His words echoed in her mind. "I've grown to care about you." But what did that mean? What were they really doing here? She found herself questioning everything, her feelings, their arrangement, her future. It had been a week since that conversation, and though Ryan had tried to keep things professional, there was an undeniable shift between them. There were stolen glances, lingering touches, and quiet moments where neither of them could quite look away from each other. It was confusing, overwhelming, and to Louisa's surprise, thrilling. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Louisa was at her desk sorting through some paperwork when she felt someone approach. The familiar warmth of Ryan's presence enveloped her before she even heard his footsteps. She glanced up, and his gaze was fixed on her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite identify. "Louisa," he said, softly, his voice low, almost urgent. "Can we talk?" Her breath hitched. She hadn't been expecting this. "Sure," she said, trying to sound calm, but she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Ryan motioned for her to join him outside, and she followed him into the corridor, her nerves on edge. They stepped into the elevator together, the quiet hum of the building the only sound between them. Ryan pressed the button for the rooftop, and as the elevator ascended, the tension between them thickened. When the doors opened, Ryan led her outside into the cool evening air. The city lights twinkled below them, and the wind tousled her hair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there looking out at the view. Finally, Ryan turned to her, his gaze intense, almost searching. "I know this is complicated. I know I said I'd give you time to figure things out, but I can't keep pretending that this is just a business deal," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I need to tell you something." Louisa's heart skipped a beat. The uncertainty in his voice mirrored the turmoil inside her own chest. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ryan took a step closer to her, closing the distance between them. His hands were at his sides, but she could see the muscles in his jaw tighten as if he were fighting with himself. "I've never been good at this, at letting people in, at trusting anyone. But with you, it's different. I don't know how or when it happened, but I can't deny it anymore. I'm falling for you, Louisa." His words hit her like a storm. She wanted to speak, to respond, but her mind was spinning. Falling for her. But they weren't supposed to have a real relationship. This was supposed to be temporary, a solution to his grandmother's insistence on marriage. It was supposed to be business, not this. Ryan took another step toward her, his eyes searching her face as if waiting for a sign. "I know this is complicated," he continued, his voice a little softer now. "But I need you to know that I'm not just doing this for my grandmother. I'm doing this because I want to be with you. I want to see where this goes." Louisa felt a lump form in her throat. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them suspended in the moment. She had never imagined herself in this situation, caught between the reality of their arrangement and the undeniable chemistry
that had formed between them. Ryan's thumb brushed against her cheek, and without thinking, she closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. When she opened them again, Ryan was looking at her with a tenderness that she hadn't seen before, and in that moment, something inside her broke free. She couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. "I'm scared too, Ryan," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm not going to lie and say that I don't feel something. I do. I feel it too." Ryan's face softened, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It wasn't the cold, calculated smile she had come to expect. It was different. Genuine. "Then let's see where this goes," he said, his voice filled with a quiet hope. Without another word, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was tender, hesitant at first, as if both of them were still unsure of what this meant. But as the kiss deepened, it became clear that this was more than just a moment. It was the beginning of something new. The days following their kiss were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Louisa's heart felt like it was floating, but she couldn't shake the anxiety that clung to her. Ryan had confessed his feelings, but what did that mean for their future? Were they really ready to take this step, or was it just an impulsive moment? At work, things had shifted. The atmosphere was no longer just professional, it was charged with something more. Ryan, who had always been distant and focused on his work, was now more present, his attention drawn to her whenever they were together,
and Louisa found herself thinking about him at the most unexpected moments. Yet the tension wasn't just between them. There was an unspoken question lingering in the air. What happens now? Ryan, for his part, seemed determined to navigate this new dynamic with caution. He didn't push her, didn't rush things, but the way he looked at her, the way his eyes softened whenever they locked gazes, told a different story. It was a Friday afternoon when Ryan asked her to meet him after work. Louisa had no idea what to expect, but she felt her stomach flutter with nervousness. She arrived at the cafe, the familiar warmth of the place, offering some comfort. Ryan was already sitting at a corner table, his usual polished look giving way to a more relaxed demeanor. He smiled when he saw her approach, a genuine smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Hey," he greeted her softly, standing up as she sat down across from him. "Hey," Louisa replied, trying to sound calm, though her nerves were betraying her. Ryan didn't waste any time. He looked at her intently, as if gathering his thoughts before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, and I want to be clear about something." He paused, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. "I want this to be real, Louisa. Not just some arrangement. I want to build something with you, but I also don't want to rush you into anything." Louisa's breath caught in her throat. This was real. "Ryan, I didn't expect any of this. I never imagined I'd end up feeling this way about you," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. His touch was warm, reassuring. "I'm here whenever you're ready. We don't have to rush anything, but just know that I want to be there for you, no matter what." Louisa felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. Ryan wasn't asking her to change her life overnight. He was offering something real, something steady. And most importantly, he was offering it without pressure. They sat in silence for a moment.
Hands still intertwined, the world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them together in that quiet space. Then Ryan stood up, pulling her gently from her seat. "Let's go for a walk," he said, his voice light, his hand still holding hers as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. Louisa couldn't help but feel like she was stepping into something new, something beautiful. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time she felt like she could face whatever came next with him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new feelings, adjustments, and growth for both Ryan and Louisa. Their connection, initially sparked by necessity, had slowly blossomed into something far deeper, far more significant. They spent more time together, both at work and outside of it, and with each passing day, Ryan's arrogance seemed to fade in the light of his growing affection for Louisa. She, in turn, found herself drawn to him in ways she hadn't anticipated, her heart opening up to the possibility of a future she'd once thought impossible. But it wasn't all easy. Though Ryan's intentions were clear, his world was still dominated by the empire he had inherited from his family, and his responsibilities weighed heavily on him. Louisa, on the other hand, had a life outside of their relationship. Her brother Lucas, whose health was deteriorating by the day. Every time Louisa saw him, the worry on his face broke her heart. It was a constant reminder of the sacrifices she had to make, and of the reality that, despite Ryan's promises, her brother's treatment still needed money. One rainy evening, as they walked down the street after dinner, the heavy silence between them felt like a weight neither of them could shake off. Ryan had noticed her distress, the way her eyes were constantly clouded with concern. He knew there was more to her story, more than what she was willing to share. "Louisa," Ryan started, his voice quiet but firm, "you've been distant lately. I know something is bothering you. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I need you to know you don't have to carry this alone." Louisa stopped walking, turning to face him. Her heart pounded in her chest as the familiar walls she had so carefully built around her emotions began to crack.
She had been trying to hold it together for so long, but now, under the weight of Ryan's concern, her strength faltered. "It's Lucas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's getting worse. The doctor said there's not much more they can do, and I don't have enough money to pay for his treatment." Ryan reached out his hand, gently touching her arm. The gesture was simple, yet it carried so much tenderness that it made her chest ache. "Louisa, Ryan paused, searching for the right words. "I'll help. Whatever it takes. I'll make sure Lucas gets the treatment he needs." Louisa looked up at him, surprised by his offer. She had never once expected Ryan to offer anything like this, especially not without hesitation. "Ryan, I can't accept that," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want to owe you anything. Not like that." Ryan took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "You've done so much for me already without asking for anything in return. You're not alone in this, Louisa. You have me now." For a moment, Louisa couldn't find the words. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at her, it was overwhelming. The walls she had spent so long building came crashing down in an instant. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Ryan replied softly. "Just let me help. Let me be there for you." They stood there in the rain, the city lights glistening around them as the storm raged above. In that moment, everything else seemed to disappear. The uncertainty, the fear, the doubts. There was only the two of them, and the unspoken promise that whatever came next, they would face it together.
Become a part of her life in ways she couldn't yet understand. Ryan, for his part, continued to show his support, always checking in on her, making sure she was holding up. His usual confident, almost arrogant demeanor had softened, and it was clear to Louisa that his feelings for her had evolved. He wasn't just the businessman who had made a deal with her. He had become someone who genuinely cared for her and for her family. One evening after work, Ryan asked her to meet him for a walk through the city. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the streets, and the air was cool with the hint of an impending autumn breeze. It was a quiet evening, with fewer people walking around than usual. Ryan led the way, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. Walking slightly ahead of her, Louisa followed, her thoughts swirling. "Louisa," he said after a while, his voice breaking the silence, "I know I've asked a lot of you. This whole arrangement, it was supposed to be a business deal, but I can't pretend anymore that it's just that. I care about you." She stopped walking, taken aback by his sudden confession. It wasn't that she hadn't felt something shift between them. It was impossible not to. But hearing him say it out loud, it made her heart race. "Ryan, I care about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared. This isn't what I planned. I never imagined my life would turn out like this." Ryan turned to face her, his expression serious, yet there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Slowly, he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to plan everything, Louisa," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes life throws things at us that we can't predict, but that doesn't mean we can't embrace them. And right now, all I want is to be with you, to see where this goes without all the expectations or fears." She swallowed, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to give her heart to someone who had once seemed like the last person on earth who could make her feel this way? "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," she confessed, her voice shaky. "But I can't deny how I feel when I'm with you. It's like everything makes sense when we're together." Ryan smiled, his expression softening. "Then let's take it one step at a time," he said. "No rush, no pressure, just us."
They stood there for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Louisa's heart was racing, but there was a warmth blossoming inside her, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. It was the feeling of hope, of possibility. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she saw the message. It was from the hospital. Her heart sank as she read the message, and her mind raced. The situation with Lucas had taken a turn for the worst, and the hospital was asking for immediate payment to continue his treatment. "Ryan," Louisa whispered, her voice cracking. They need the money now. If I don't pay, they won't continue his treatment." Ryan's expression hardened, his eyes steely with determination. "We'll go right now," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'll take care of it. This is on me." Louisa shook her head, her chest tight with both gratitude and guilt. "I can't keep accepting your help," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's too much. I don't deserve it." Ryan took a step closer, cupping her face gently with his hand. "You don't have to deserve it, Louisa," he said softly. "You're not alone in this anymore. You never will be." The words, so simple and yet so profound, broke through the last of her resistance. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, and allowed herself to be led, not just by Ryan, but by the new reality they were building together. The hospital lobby was sterile and cold, but the air between Ryan and Louisa was anything but. The moment they stepped inside, Louisa felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, followed closely by guilt. She had never imagined that she would be here, standing in the midst of the crisis with the man who had once been nothing more than a distant, arrogant boss. Ryan's hand was steady on her back as he led her to the admissions desk. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by an unspoken understanding that this was not about business or deals. This was about people, about life, love, and the kind of family he had never thought he needed until now. Louisa's heart beat fast in her chest as she approached the receptionist. She was trying to keep her composure, but the thought of her brother's life being in danger, of the debt she owed, made it difficult to breathe. "How can I help you?" the receptionist asked, looking at them both with a polite smile. Louisa forced a smile, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "I need to pay for my brother's treatment," she said softly, looking down at the papers in her hands. "They've told me I need to make a payment immediately or they won't continue the care." The receptionist nodded and handed over the necessary forms while Ryan stepped forward, his presence filling the space around them. "I'll take care of it," Ryan said, his tone final and commanding. He glanced at Louisa, who opened her mouth to protest, but he silenced her with a look. "It's done." She could see the determination in his eyes, but the knot in her stomach tightened. The last thing she wanted was to be beholden to him, but she knew she had no choice. Her brother's health was the only thing that mattered now. She couldn't lose him, not when she had a chance to save him. Later that evening, as they walked out of the hospital, the weight of the day seemed to settle around them. The cool night air wrapped around them like a blanket, and for a moment, Louisa allowed herself to lean against Ryan's side, her heart still heavy, but also full in a way it hadn't been before. They didn't speak for a while, the silence between them comfortable, but it was Ryan who finally broke it. "Louisa," he said softly, his voice low and earnest, "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. I'm doing this because I care, because I want to see you and your brother happy. I don't want you to carry this burden alone." Her throat tightened at his words, and she swallowed, turning her head to look at him. He was being honest, genuine even, and it was a side of him she hadn't seen before. It was as if with every step he was shedding a part of the man he used to be and revealing someone new, a man capable of love and sacrifice. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to thank you, Ryan. I don't know how to—" He cut her off with a soft chuckle, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just let me help you, and let's see where this goes together." Louisa stopped walking and turned to face him fully, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in the way he said it, something that made her believe. In this moment. In them. Together, she echoed, a smile tugging at her lips. You mean it, don't you? He nodded, his gaze never leaving her. I mean it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the weight of the world falling away as they shared a quiet understanding. In that moment, everything that had come before, the tension, the uncertainty, the business arrangement, felt like it was in the past. All that mattered now was what lay ahead, the promise of a future neither of them had planned for, but both were willing to embrace. Later that night, as Louisa sat by her brother's bedside, holding his hand and watching him sleep, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. She had started this journey with so much fear and doubt. The thought of marrying Ryan felt like a trap, something she had to do to protect her brother, to secure his future. But now things were different. Ryan had changed the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. His kindness, his commitment, everything he had done for her and her family had opened her heart in ways she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. And as she gazed at her brother's peaceful face, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning." The days that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments, long hours at the office, and quiet moments between Ryan and Louisa. As much as Louisa tried to keep her distance, it was impossible to ignore the pull between them. Ryan, who had once seemed so unapproachable, had become a constant presence in her life, and every time their eyes met, there was a flicker of something deeper, something unspoken. Ryan, for his part, had never been more focused. He wasn't just invested in the business anymore. He was invested in her, in them, and every time he saw her, he found himself wanting more. More than just a business arrangement, more than just a contract, more than what they had agreed on. One evening, after another successful round of treatments for Ryan, invited Louisa to dinner. At first, she hesitated, not wanting to cross the line between their arrangement and something more. But she couldn't deny the urge to spend time with him, the man who had turned her world upside down. As they sat across from each other at an upscale restaurant, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Ryan pushed his plate away, focusing entirely on her, his eyes soft and intent. "Louisa," he began, his voice gentle but serious. "I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow, nervously swirling her wine glass. "About what?" "About everything about us." Her heart skipped a beat. She could feel her palms grow clammy, but she fought to keep her composure. "Ryan, we've been through a lot. I just want you to know that what you've done for my brother, for me, it means everything." But he cut her off, leaning forward. I know what you're going to say." He paused, searching her face for a sign that she'd understand. "But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about us, Louisa. What happens after all of this? What happens when the contract ends?" Louisa felt her breath catch in her throat. She had always known that this day would come, that they would have to address what had been growing between them, but she had never expected it to happen like this. So suddenly. "So, Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know what happens next. I never expected this. I never expected you." His lips curled into a soft smile, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability behind his eyes. "I didn't expect you either," he admitted. "But that's the thing, Louisa. I want to try. I want to see what this could be, without the contracts, without the deals, just us." For a long moment, there was silence between them, and the weight of his words settled in her chest like a promise. "What if I don't know how to trust you yet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm scared?" Ryan reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'll earn your trust," he said softly. "I'll prove to you every day that I'm worth it. That we are worth it." Louisa closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting his words wash over her. She had always been so careful, so guarded. But something about him, about this, felt different, felt real. Slowly, she opened her eyes and met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "Let's see where this goes." Ryan's face lit up, and without another word, he stood up and walked around the table, offering his hand to her. She hesitated for only a second before placing her hand in his. As he helped her to her feet, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead, a promise for the future. "Together," he whispered, and in that moment, Louisa knew that nothing could ever be the same. The following days were filled with uncertainty, yet there was a sense of hope that lingered in the air between them. Their decision to give their relationship a chance without the pressure of contracts or business deals felt like a quiet revolution, both exhilarating and terrifying for Louisa. This was uncharted territory. She had spent so many years putting others before herself, especially her brother, that the idea of putting her heart first was overwhelming. Ryan, with all his wealth, power, and status, had always seemed like a world apart. And now, here they were, standing on the brink of something new, something neither of them had expected. Ryan, for his part, was determined. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was the greatest challenge of all. Louisa had become more than just a contract. She had become the most important person in his life, and he was willing to fight for her, for them.
Large foyer, he was dressed casually, a stark contrast to the polished, intimidating man she had first met. His eyes, however, were still the same, intense, passionate, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Louisa," he said softly, taking her hand, "I'd been thinking about our future." Her pulse quickened, but she held her composure. "Ryan, I don't know if we're ready for all of this," she confessed, her voice a mix of fear and longing. "I don't know if I can be the woman you need." Ryan pulled her closer, his grip firm but gentle. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. That's enough for me." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. "But what about everything else?" she asked. "Your world, my world, it's all so different." Ryan smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that made her feel safe in his presence. "That's why we're going to make our own world," he said, "together." Without waiting for a response, he led her outside to the garden where a small gathering was taking place. His family had arrived to meet her, eager to finally welcome her into their circle. Louisa's heart raced as she stepped into the crowd, all eyes on her. But there was one pair of eyes she was focused on. Ryan's. His gaze was unwavering, full of pride and affection, as he stood by her side, guiding her through the evening with ease. The moment they shared was electric. There was no going back now. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Ryan took Louisa's hand again, leading her to a quiet spot by the garden fountain. The moonlight bathed them in soft silver light, creating a surreal moment in which the world seemed to pause. Ryan turned to face her, his expression serious, but his eyes full of emotion. "Louisa," he said softly, "I need to ask you something that will change everything." Her heart thudded her chest. She knew what was coming. She could feel it. Ryan got down on one knee, and Louisa gasped in surprise. "Louisa, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with hope. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart both full and heavy. This moment was everything she had dreamed of, yet never thought she would experience. A man like Ryan, the most powerful man in the room, was asking her to be by his side forever. a simple woman from a humble background, being offered the world? She nodded, unable to find the right words to express the overwhelming emotions coursing through her. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryan smiled and without hesitation pulled her into his arms. The crowd that had gathered around them cheered, but in that moment it was as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "I love you, Louisa," Ryan murmured, his lips brushing against her ear, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." The rest of the evening was a blur of celebration and laughter, but for Louisa and Ryan, it was the beginning of something far more profound than a contract or an agreement. It was the beginning of their forever. We loved having you here. Share in the comments what you thought of the story and how we can make it even better next time.